It's a regular Tuesday morning in Mumbai at 6:30, and look who we bump into on the streets of Mumbai this morning. Hello,
What a coincidence.
Chris. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
What a spot.
Welcome to Mumbai.
Thank you.
This
you.
is
Amazing.
a surprise.
But yeah, sort of. How are you?
Very well. How are you?
Yeah, good. What an amazing city.
So you're out for a run this morning. Tell me a little bit about your fitness routine.
Well, yeah, so fitness routine. Look, when you're traveling a lot, lots of time zones, I think one of the key routines for me is always to get out in the morning and just not only get the body moving again, especially after the long flights, but also just, it's for me the best way to actually feel a place.
Yeah.
Because you can imagine, when we do our market visits, we go from shop to shop, we see a lot of our watches in our stores, which, we have seen before.
Of course.
But in order to sort of just immerse yourself a little bit into what a place is like, I always find the mornings, they're really quite special.
Yeah.
Because this is when you see what the locals are actually doing on a regular morning. And I think by sort of not planning too much, by going on my own, by getting a little bit lost almost, you can really, when it goes well, you can really see amazing things and have amazing experiences. So this is where we are.
What is the life of a CEO at IWC?
Well, look, every day is different. I think that is the one constant. I think we haven't had a boring day since I started in this role. I think it's quite lucky that I didn't quite know what to expect.
Yeah.
Like, in a way, like if you know a company that well, and if you know the people really well, and it's like family, it's a very natural transition. The perspective from the outside of the job to perspective when you're responsible and when you're doing it is quite different. I think on the first day I was asked to come to the city theatre of Schaffhausen, and all of our colleagues were there, and they put me up on stage and introduced me in my new role, and I was supposed to, do a first introduction. And when you stand there and you see the 1,200 faces in the audience, and you realize you're responsible for people's livelihoods, for their mortgages, their families, their holidays, everything. Yeah. It's when the responsibility strikes you. Sure. As you know, from 2017 onwards, we haven't had a quiet time, as it were. You had huge global turbulence, you had all of COVID, everything beyond that. You had massive changes in the industry. Yeah. We've seen massively people's lifestyles, their relationship with products, their relationship with consumption, with luxury, with sustainability, all those things, they have really changed over the last 5-6 years dramatically. Right. So there's not one answer that is valid in 2017 and then valid 5 years later. Right. So it's that flexibility, I think, the days of a CEO really demand. Okay, you make it sound very simple. No. It's an irony. You say it's a not so complicated industry. You just launched one of the most complicated watches that doesn't need changes for 45 million years. Yeah. Well, look, there's two components to this watch. There's this entire element of the perpetual and eternal calendar. And there is two fundamental types of watches. There is perpetual calendars. Perpetual calendars know in principle that there should be a leap year at the end of February every 4 years. Yeah. But then our actual calendar doesn't quite behave like that, because the difference between the human-made calendar and the natural cycle of the sun and the moon and everything we observe in the universe is not quite the same. Right. So over time, the calendar slides out of sync. So over time, the calendar systems have become more and more complex to account for those kind of deviations. And so in our calendar we're using today, going back to Pope Gregor, the Gregorian calendar, where you should have 100 leap years in 400 years, there's only 97. So we're skipping leap years in the year 2100, 200, and 300. And the eternal calendar accounts for that. Yeah. And the way that's been done, which is the really ingenious next step from Kurt Klaas's perpetual calendar, is to add a 400-year gear. Yeah. And this 400-year gear rotates once only every 400 years. Right? That's sort of less than a quarter in our lifetimes, as to be expected. And then it knows exactly when those exceptions are. So that keeps running all the way to the end of the calendar that we know. And if then there is a leap year exception as expected, then of course this will run for the next 4,000 years as well. It is just a question of what we will define for the year 4000. The second element is the moon phase. Now the moon phase, the actual lunation, which is the cycle of the moon, is, and I won't recall this number correctly now, but it's something like 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, something seconds, right? And the closer you can get the gearing of your moon phase to that lunation cycle, the less deviation you're going to have. Right. So a regular perpetual calendar at IWC is 570 years, and we added 3 additional wheels, fed this to a computer, made some calculations, then designed it, and ended up with an accuracy of 45 million years for the moon phase. And that's a new Guinness World Record, recently recognized, beating the previous 2.8 million years or whatever it was.
So tell me, you've been in Mumbai 2 days. What's fascinated you the most?
No, it's a really vibrant city, and you have this huge. It's always when you come to places that have this very, very rapid urban development. You have these, from an architect's point of view, it's really interesting contrast between the very historic and the extremely modern. And it's kind of a conversation a country is almost having with itself about ways of living from, these beautiful Art Deco historic buildings from the early 20th century, and then on the other hand, the modern high-rise, and also this discussion. Is the seafront, is it bungalows or is it going to be 50-story luxury condos? And then also always that question, how much luxury housing will we need ultimately in the city? And I think it's really a decisive moment of change, because that master plan you lay down now is the reality for the next 100, 150 years. So it's really interesting to see that change, and it's fundamentally different from 2009. The city has, exploded in terms of activity, in terms of new development, in terms of new shopping malls now as well, and I think it's really an exciting time for Mumbai.
Right. In terms of the luxury industry in general, Chris, do you see a shifting trend? Because personally, in Mumbai, in India, we see a trend. People go for the more known brands and more marketed brands. How do you sort of maintain that balance, and where do you see this trend going globally?
I mean, look, the watch market has always been a very branded market. It's different with jewelry, but from our perspective with watches, I think there's always a tipping point when there's a certain amount of general interest in the population, and you see that it goes beyond like a core segment of people, and there is an interest, and then you can see over time that a much wider target group will be interested in watches. They will know what things are. They will ask, and you get younger collectors, etc., and you get a much more diverse set. In the beginning, it is always the traveling group of people that are internationally educated, etc., that first adopt these kind of trends. But over time, and we've seen this in places like China, you get a really broad interest, and you get immensely educated customers. And every time I'm blown away at what level of knowledge people have. Especially again since COVID, there was such a massive drive in people educating themselves on their passion interests, and come back and they know more than us.
That's true though.
About our brands.
I do get baffled a few times.
And that I think has really changed the dynamic a lot, and also. To an extent, what we see in global media, streaming media, YouTube and the like, you have really a globalization of very quick opinions and tastes and knowledge about things. This is really accelerating.
Another trend I've seen, Chris, is, or I'm personally also following, is vintage. I'm going back into time and grabbing onto watches that have more historic value. And you're doing that. But with a twist, like you're holding on to the DNA of the Portuguese, but evolving it further. How are you sort of maintaining that balance? And do you think brands are going in the direction of bringing back heritage?
Look, heritage is the sort of backwards looking in collecting and appreciating is very, very important for context. And it explains the present. And I think this is really where history is so important. And I think if you become passionate about a topic area, sooner or later you want to find out the roots of absolutely everything. And this is why I think vintage is such an interesting and important part of watch appreciation, because it contextualizes what we have today. That doesn't mean that I'm personally convinced that everything has to be neo-vintage, because I think in 50 years from now, a neo-vintage, I'm not sure how favorably, we will look back at those moments when we're trying to reenact history. But what I find really, really interesting when you have people who are into watches that collect also vintage or that start with vintage, and that informs their decision making. And as we know now with the 90s, things do get vintage quite quickly. And what we think today is new and very different, 15 years down the line, it becomes a modern classic, and then it becomes vintage and so on. So it's all relative to your viewpoint. But having a look at what's coming in engineer, it will be an expensive year.
It will be an expensive year. Okay, then. On that note, thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.
Pleasure having you in Mumbai.
Sun is rising.
Sun is rising finally, and we hope to see you back again soon with another IWC boutique, maybe.
Have a great day.